There was a boy in the back row of room 4B who never said a word. Day after day, he slipped quietly into class, head down, eyes fixed on the floor, and sat in the same seat third from the window, beside the radiator that clanked every morning. As the school warmed up, his name was Ethan, but most of his classmates just referred to him as that quiet guy. Some even forgot he was there. He was a ghost in the bustling hallways, a shadow at lunch, and a silent observer during every class discussion. Teachers called his name during attendance. He nodded. They asked him a question. He scribbled an answer. But his voice? No one had ever really heard it. And yet, Ethan wasn't unkind or rude. He always held the door open for people. He never laughed when someone tripped. He returned dropped pens without a word. But no one tried to know him either. They assumed he wanted to be alone. And maybe he did. Or maybe he didn't know how not to be. The students in 4B were a mix of personalities: loud, witty, ambitious, awkward, popular, and everything in between. There was Mia, the girl who always had something clever to say. There was Jordan, the class clown who could turn any topic into a joke. There was Claire, the straightest student who was always first to raise her hand. And then there was Ethan, who remained invisible, even in a room filled with noise. But something was different about this semester. Their homeroom teacher, Mr. Teller, believed in storytelling. He said stories had power, that everyone had something worth sharing. We connect through our stories, he told them on the first day. And this term, each of you will tell yours. The class groaned. Storytelling? In front of everyone? Some were excited, others dreaded it. But Mr. Teller was firm. Each week, one student would take the front of the room and talk for 5 minutes. No PowerPoints, no scripts, just their voice. Speak from your truth, he said. Speak from your scars or your joys or your weirdest moment. Just speak. Ethan's stomach twisted when he heard that. He hadn't spoken more than a sentence aloud in months. Speaking in front of the whole class, he would rather disappear. But the list was made, and names were assigned to dates. Ethan's was last. You'll have time, Mr. Teller said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. But time wasn't the problem. Week by week, the stories began. Mia talked about how her jokes were a shield for her anxiety. The class laughed, then listened, then clapped slowly, realizing how real it all was. Jordan shared about losing his older brother and how humor became his way of coping. Claire opened up about the pressure she felt from her parents to always succeed. Even the students who weren't close to each other began nodding more in the halls, exchanging words that weren't just hey and bye. And slowly, a strange thing began to happen. Empathy filled the gaps between them. People started sitting with each other who hadn't before. Study groups formed between odd pairings. Secrets were shared in whispers. Eyes softened, and a sense of connection bloomed like wildflowers through cracks in concrete. Ethan, however, remained in the back. He listened. He watched. Every story made him feel something, a strange ache, like he was on the edge of something beautiful and terrifying. But still, he didn't speak. He knew his turn was coming, and with each passing week, his heart beat faster. At home, Ethan's world was quiet too. His mom worked double shifts at the diner and barely had energy by the time she came home. His dad had left years ago, leaving behind only a box of dusty tools in the garage and questions that never got answered. Ethan's little sister, Lily, was the only person he talked to. She would crawl into his room some nights, asking him to tell her stories he never dared speak at school. Why don't you talk more at school? Lily had asked once, her head resting on his shoulder. He paused. I don't know, he said softly. It just feels hard, like there's a wall. But your stories are so good, she whispered. If people heard them, they'd like you. He smiled weakly. Maybe. And now, the day was drawing closer. 3 weeks before his turn, Mr. Teller gave a small reminder to the class. Next up is Layla, then Chris, then Ethan. That was all he said. But Ethan's heart dropped. That afternoon, he sat in the library, staring at a blank notebook. What could he even say? Would he talk about the time he almost ran away? About how he used to watch cartoons alone on the floor while his parents fought in the kitchen? Or maybe about the old camera he found in the attic and how taking pictures became his way of speaking without sound? No, that felt too exposed, too raw. But as he flipped through the notebook, words slowly began to appear. I used to think my silence made me invisible, but really, it just made me unheard. That line stayed at the top of the page for days. 2 weeks before his speech, Ethan did something strange. He stayed after class. Mr. Teller looked up in surprise. Everything okay, Ethan? Ethan hesitated. His throat was tight. I don't think I can do it, he finally said. Mr. Teller didn't push. He just sat beside him and waited. Ethan stared at his hands. I haven't really talked in front of people. I always mess up. My voice sounds weird. My head goes blank. People will judge me. Mr. Teller nodded. But they've shared their stories. Do you think less of them? No, Ethan admitted. I think more of them. Exactly. And they will of you. Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't walk out either. A week later, he sat at his kitchen table, Lily bouncing on a chair beside him as he read his draft aloud. His voice cracked. He stumbled, but she clapped at the end. You sounded like a real author, she said, beaming. He shook his head, laughing. A scared one. That's okay, she said. Even scared people can be brave. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, words swirling in his mind like dust in the sunlight. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect. Maybe he just needed to be honest. The day finally came. It was a gray Tuesday morning. Rain pattered gently outside. Inside room 4B, desks were arranged in a circle. Ethan walked in, notebook in hand, heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked to the center. When Mr. Teller called his name, silence fell. 30 eyes stared at him. He could hear his own breathing. He looked down at his notebook, and then he closed it. He looked up. My name is Ethan, he began, voice trembling. And this is the first time I've spoken more than a sentence in class. No one moved. He swallowed hard. I've been quiet for a long time. Not because I don't have things to say, but because I thought no one would care. Or worse, that they'd laugh. I've watched all of you share your stories, and I've admired every single one. You were brave, even when it was hard. And I realized I want to be brave too. He paused, eyes scanning the circle. Silence can feel safe, but it can also be a cage. For me, it started when my dad left. Everything felt loud and painful, and the only thing I could control was my voice. So, I stopped using it. I figured, if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't say the wrong thing, wouldn't make things worse, wouldn't be noticed. But I didn't realize I was locking parts of myself away. Ethan's hands were shaking slightly, but his voice had steadied. I write stories about people who are braver than me, about kids who save the world, even though they're scared. I've written stories where I'm the hero, because in real life, I never felt like one. The room was completely still. He continued. I've been taking pictures of people since last year. Not because I'm a creep, he chuckled nervously, and a few people smiled, but because I see things in moments, like when Mia's laughing too hard to breathe, or when Jordan stares out the window thinking of his brother, or when Claire looks nervous before a test, even though she always gets the top score. He took a breath. I wanted to show people that even the smallest parts of them matter, that even if they don't say it out loud, someone sees them. His voice cracked again, but he didn't stop. I thought being invisible would protect me, but watching all of you tell your stories, it made me want to be seen. The bell hadn't rung, but the air felt charged, and just like that, Ethan's voice faded, his last words hanging in the quiet classroom. For a long moment after Ethan finished speaking, no one said a word. The silence was different this time, heavier, yet warmer. Not the kind of silence born from awkwardness, but one soaked in reflection and awe. And then, slowly, Mia started clapping. Jordan joined. Claire followed. One by one, the entire class was on their feet, clapping not politely, not out of obligation, but with real feeling. Ethan stood in the center of it all, stunned. His hands trembled, his heart raced, and for a split second, he wondered if maybe he had imagined the whole thing. But the smiles around the room told him it was real. People weren't just seeing him, they were hearing him. Mr. Teller wiped at the corner of his eye and stepped forward. That, he said, his voice low but steady, is the power of story. After class, several students came up to Ethan. Mia gave him a gentle punch on the arm and said, "You should talk more. You're kinda amazing." Jordan ruffled his hair with a grin. "Dude, I had no idea you were so deep. Respect." Claire simply hugged him. No words, just understanding. But what surprised Ethan most was when Liam, the soccer team captain and someone he'd never really spoken to, stopped him by the lockers. "Hey," Liam said, shifting awkwardly. "What you said today hit me. My brother's been quiet since our dad left too. I think I get it now. Thanks for sharing that." Ethan nodded, barely managing a reply. It was overwhelming, the acceptance, the warmth, the sudden shift from ghost to person. In the following days, things began to change. People who once passed him by now said hello. Some asked about his photography. Others asked if he could help them write a story of their own. His quiet wasn't something to hide anymore. It had become a part of his strength. He started bringing his camera to school more often, not hiding it, not just taking secret snapshots, but asking, "Can I take your photo?" And when people said yes, he captured them in moments of laughter, deep thought, silliness, and stillness. He posted them on a shared board Mr. Teller created outside the classroom called Voices Unseen. One photo was of Mia sitting under a tree, eyes closed, headphones in. Another was of Jordan staring at the clouds during recess. One of Claire, biting her pencil, lost in a world of equations. He wrote captions beneath each one, short, poetic notes that told the truth without saying too much. It caught on fast. Soon, students were leaving sticky notes under the photos with kind words, small stories of their own, or just a thank you. The board became a place people stopped by between classes. It wasn't just about pictures. It was about being seen and heard in ways that didn't require being loud. One afternoon, as he was pinning up a new photo of Lily from home holding a stack of his story notebooks, Mr. Teller walked up beside him. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," he said gently. Ethan looked down, a little embarrassed. "I didn't do anything special." "No," Mr. Teller said. "You did something brave. You showed others that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes that whisper becomes the loudest voice in the room." Those words stuck with Ethan. He realized something important. His voice didn't have to sound like everyone else's. It just had to be his. Weeks passed, and the end of the school year approached. On the final day of class, Mr. Teller surprised everyone by handing out small journals. "I want you to keep writing your stories," he said, "because life doesn't stop teaching once class ends." When Ethan flipped his open, he saw a note on the inside cover. "For Ethan, whose voice changed his class more than he knows." Mr. T. That afternoon, Ethan found himself back in the library, the place where his journey had quietly started. Only this time, he wasn't hiding behind a notebook. He sat by the window, sunlight warming the pages, and began writing a new story. One that didn't begin with silence, but with a spark. That story wasn't about a fictional hero with superpowers. It was about a quiet boy who stood up and spoke, and in doing so, discovered the power he'd always had inside him. The following week, the school held its annual open mic for students. It had always been a quirky, undertended event, just a few songs, some jokes, a lot of nerves. But this time, something was different. Word had gotten around that the boy who never spoke was going to read a piece. When Ethan stepped onto the stage, he looked out and saw familiar faces: Mia in the front row, Jordan giving a thumbs up, Claire with her camera. Even Liam and some members of the soccer team had come. And there was Mr. Teller, standing at the back with a proud smile. But most special of all was Lily, sitting with their mom, grinning wide and holding a handmade sign that read, "Go Ethan." He took a deep breath and began reading. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't even a poem. It was a story about a boy who blended in, who lived in the background, who thought no one noticed. But through stories, both his and others, he learned that silence isn't the absence of a voice. It's the place where courage waits to speak. And that courage? It's contagious. By the end of his reading, the room was quiet again. That warm, heavy silence returned, the kind that says we heard you. And once more, it broke into thunderous applause. Ethan smiled. For the first time in a long time, He felt not just seen, but known. From that moment forward, things were never quite the same. Not because Ethan became the loudest in the room, but because everyone else learned how to listen and how to look for the stories behind the silence. And Ethan? He kept writing, kept photographing, kept telling stories that made people feel. He still liked sitting in the back sometimes, but now, it wasn't to hide. It was to observe, to appreciate, to gather pieces of life for the next story he'd one day tell. Because he'd learned something that changed everything. Sometimes, the quietest voice carries the strongest story. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage to set that story free. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, remember this: every story has power, and yours is waiting to be heard. Don't be afraid to speak. Even the softest voice can change the world. Subscribe for more motivational stories like this. And if you connected with Ethan's journey, drop a comment below. We're listening.